Want to make a card that'll wow your friends and look like it took hours to make but actually didn't? Today I'm sharing how to create this Japanese-inspired side stepper card featuring an adorable Kokeshi doll complete with 3D flowers, layered kimono details, and a touch of gold elegance. We'll go step by step through die cutting, layering, coloring, and even how to fold your own side stepper base. No fancy die required. It's detailed but beginner friendly, and I've got plenty of tips to make it stress-free. Let's dive in. I'm working on another beautiful project using the Spring in Kyoto collection by Alex Siberia Designs and Spellbinders. For this card, I'll be using this beautiful 3D embossing folder, better press plates, and dies. I'll be using the thank you sentiment and the pretty cherry blossoms press plates as well, so let's get started. Stick with me until the end of the video and I'll show you a second card design. Alright, before we get to the fun embellishments, let's build the stepper card base. Don't worry, it's easier than it looks. The first thing I'll do is create the stepper base. I'm using a standard A2 size card in Waterfall by Spellbinders. It's cut to 5.5 by 8.5 inches. I'll have all the exact measurements and supplies listed in my blog post so you can check there for reference. I need to slit a portion of the card base and I'll use my Fiskars trimmer because it has clear measurements along the length and the wire indicates exactly where the blade will cut. Therefore, it's the exact tool I'll need to help with precision cutting. If you don't have a trimmer like this, you can absolutely use a ruler and a craft knife. Now, I'll score this base at 4.25 inches, just like you would for a standard A2 card. Since this cardstock is quite thick, I'm going to score it on both sides. Here's a quick tip. If your scoring tool slips like mine just did, you can use the rounded end of your bone folder to press the fibers back down. Works like a charm. We'll have more scoring to do later and you can absolutely make the score line then, but I kind of did it out of habit, but you don't have to. I'll place the panel at the 3.5 inch mark on the trimmer and lift this carefully and slide the cutting blade down the rail to the 1 inch mark. Now, I'll make a vertical cut starting at 1 inch where the blade is now positioned and slide the blade down stopping at 6.5 inches. Now, the panel is split into 3 inches and 2.5 inch segments. Now, I'll emboss this panel using this beautiful 3D embossing folder. One thing that needs mention here is if you decide to emboss your panel, like I'm doing here, you need to decide beforehand which side you'd like to have the steps. If you plan on having the steps to the right, then the narrower 2.5 inch segment must be on the right when you place it inside the embossing folder. But if you want the steps on the left, then of course the narrower segment has to be on the left. I forgot to do that on the second card I made, so you'll see the steps are on the left side on that one too. Nothing wrong in it, but I just wanted to make sure you make note of this. For the embossing, I'm using platform A, then the embossing folder with the card panel inside, and finally the adapter plate on top since this is a 3D folder. The embossing is complete and now it's time to score the steps. I'll score again at 4.25 inches across the full width since the score line is a little flattened out after the embossing. I'll have the narrower 2.5 inch section at the top when you place it on the scoreboard, as that's the portion I'll be scoring. I won't score the entire width of the card, but I'll score only up to the cut line. And I'm scoring at 1 inch, 2 inches, 3/4 inches, 4.5 inches, and 6.5 inches. Make sure to check out the full supply list and measurements in my blog post. I've linked it in this video description below. Now, folding the steps. We're going to do a mountain fold at 1 inch, valley fold at 2 inches, mountain fold again at 3.25 inches, skip the 4.25 inch score, then fold again at 4.5 inches into a valley and mountain at 6.5 inches. I'll crease the folds well and you'll see the shape come together. Tall panel on the right and the stepped layers on the left. And there you go. You've got your stepper card base ready, complete with embossed detail and perfect folds. Here's what I'll use to decorate the card front. The smaller cherry blossoms with the cherry blossoms better press plate and its coordinating die to cut it out. The blossoms and sentiments better press plate and die set, and I'll use the flowers and the thank you sentiment pieces from this set and the Kokeshi dolls etched dies set to create the main focal point. It comes with 2 different types of hairdo for the doll and all the tiny details for the costume. Let me get started with creating the better press elements. I'm using Canson watercolor paper here for a couple of reasons. I'll be using watercolor markers to color the flowers, and also watercolor paper is thick and I'll get a better letterpress effect with it. I'm using Betterpress ink in black because it's waterproof and that will work best with my watercolor markers. I'll get all the plates pressed at once, so I'm using a large panel of watercolor paper. I'll add a teensy bit of glue with my tape runner so the panel sticks to the plastic platen. I'll apply ink to the press plates and I'll run it through my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cutting machine. The images are pressed and ready and I'll die cut them out only after I'm done coloring. It'll be much easier that way. So first, let's talk about these tiny die cut pieces for the Kokeshi doll. I used almost all of the dies to cut out all the elements, but cut out 2 of the hair pieces. I'll use the single bun on this doll, but if you use the one with the 2 little buns, you'll see there's a slit on this piece, which is basically used to slide the facial piece in. You can glue the face behind the hair piece. There are 2 additional pieces for the face. This small band that I cut out of black cardstock and goes behind the eyes, and the tiny semicircle piece that goes behind the mouth. I didn't have any red scraps, so I'll use a Sharpie to color it. I cut out the floral designs for the kimono, the sleeves, the hair accessories, what I believe are the kanzashi, those beautiful Japanese hairpins. There's also pieces for the fan, a piece for the neckline, and the inner collar of the vest-like underlayer. The details in this die set are unbelievable. Let's start with the face. This piece goes behind the eyes, and you'll want to make sure everything is well aligned and follows the contour of the face. I'll use a red Sharpie to color in the small semicircle piece and adhere it behind the opening for the mouth. Now for the headpiece, I'm applying a generous amount of glue to make it easier to slide it into place, and there we go, it fits nicely. I'll add the band to the hair, set that aside to dry, and move on to the body. You'll notice that the pieces have etched guides to help with placement. For example, the body piece has markings to show where the neck, collars, waistband, and other pieces go. Super helpful. I use Spellbinders brushed gold cardstock for the waistband, and I'll adhere it before attaching the sleeves. The sleeves will follow the contours of the shoulders, so it won't be difficult to place that. I'll glue a couple of gold bands to the sleeves and then glue just the top edges of the sleeves so the bottom stays loose for a nice 3D effect. This is when I realized I should adhere the collars of the inner and outerwear. Fortunately, the glue is still wet, and before the sleeves are fully down, I'm tucking in the inner collar and kimono trim pieces. One goes underneath, the other on top. Just match the edged guides and you're good. You can even add thin foam tape or cardstock scraps underneath some of these pieces for added dimension. I'll trim off the overhanging bits and adhere the head, making sure it's well aligned and looks proportionate to the body. For the fan, I layered a small waterfall piece beneath the gold to make it pop against the kimono that I cut out of teal topaz. I didn't want the blues to blend in too much. Now, the kanzashi hairpins, I'm using a couple of tiny die-cut circles and flowers, but you can swap in any embellishments you like. Super customizable. The gold centers on the floral elements really bring everything together. I'm amazed at how much detail you get with this die set. I'll add some glue and I'm using clear tape on the back to hold the pins in place since they're such tiny and narrow die cuts. And with that, the doll is done. So cute, right? Now let's bring the cherry blossoms to life. I'll try out a couple of peaches, pinks, and greens and get started. I'm using Karen brush markers on watercolor paper. The paper helps with blending and prevents warping since I'll be using a fair amount of water on it. I'll apply the colors in the centers of each flower, then use a water brush to gently flick the color outward, creating a soft gradient. I'm leaving the very edges uncolored for a nice highlight effect. Because we're using water-based ink, there's no bleed through, so it'll look neat from the back. I'll give this a quick zap with my heat tool and cut them out with the coordinating dies. The largest flower turned out a bit blotchy for my liking, so I'll save it for decorating the envelope. The rest dried beautifully and I love the watercolor effect. Let me go ahead and put it all together. For the inside of the card, I cut a white panel measuring 3 7/8 by 2 3/4 inches. I'm gluing it down with a generous amount of adhesive so it holds to the bumpy surface. Now that I'm looking at the panel, I think the embossing needs a bit of added interest. So I'll use my Hero Arts Unicorn ink, which is a white pigment ink, and swipe it across the panel. See how that creates a bit of contrast and breaks up the solid color? It's totally optional, but I love how it adds dimension. With all the pieces pressed, embossed, and die cut, it's time to bring it all together. Let's start by adhering the layers of cherry blossoms on the steps, tucking them into the folds. I'm using foam tape for the first flower to give it lift. The second one tucks slightly under the fold, so I've only added foam to the bottom. The third flower is glued flat so it doesn't add too much more bulk. If you want to go even flatter, you can skip foam altogether. Next, I'll adhere the doll to the right panel. I'll use foam tape behind her to really make her pop off the card. Then I'll attach the thank you sentiment banner using a thin foam strip. Look how pretty this is. It stands up so well as a display piece, and it has texture, gold accents, and such a cheerful spring look with the colors. And it fits perfectly inside a standard A2 envelope. It's a little snug because of all the dimension, but it works. It will need extra postage if you're mailing it out because of the layers, but if you prefer, you can always keep it flat by skipping the foam tape. So here's the second card I made. I actually used the same embossing folder as before, but this time I went with a different color palette, of course. Other than that, the design is pretty similar to the first one, with the stepper on the left hand side again. That happened because I made the alignment mistake I'd alluded to earlier in the video. I should have lined up the narrower segment to the right, so when I folded the card, the steps ended up on the left. Now, if I had wanted the steps on the right on this card, I could have flipped the panel and used the deboss side of the embossing folder instead. But I really preferred the embossed texture, so I chose to keep the layout as is. I also swiped some silver pigment ink onto the embossed pattern like I did with the previous card, and I love the very subtle contrast on this. This version doesn't use any foam tape, so the whole card lies much flatter, which is perfect if you're looking for a more mail-friendly option. I also used the fan and bows die set to create this decorative fan. These are all the little pieces that go into making the fan base and bow, and it came together beautifully. And again, the side stepper format just adds such a lovely touch. I'm really happy with how this turned out. It has such an elegant vibe thanks to the embossing and delicate details from the Spellbinders collection. If you're looking for more ideas for fun fold cards, I recently made a video on 3 different types of folds, including one for a gift card holder that you can use to create cards for any occasion. You can watch it here.